The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Forward Operating Base Sentinel, the kind of light that made everything look bleached and brutal. Dust devils spun lazy circles between the concrete blast barriers, carrying the perpetual scent of diesel fuel and desperation that clung to every combat outpost in Helmand Province. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Elena Ghost Rodriguez stepped out of the supply convoy's lead Humvee, her small frame almost disappearing behind the vehicle's armored bulk. At 5'4", with dark hair pulled into a regulation bun, and olive skin that spoke of her grandmother's heritage from Nuevo México, she looked like exactly what her paperwork said: a logistics officer transferred from Camp Leatherneck to handle supply coordination. Her ACUs were crisp but not new, worn enough to suggest field experience, but without the telltale fade patterns of someone who'd spent months in the sandbox. She carried a standard-issue laptop bag and a well-used notebook, the kind supply officers use to track everything from MREs to ammunition counts. Nothing about her suggested anything more than bureaucratic competence. Staff Sergeant Morrison, the FOB's operations NCO, approached with the practiced indifference of someone who'd processed dozens of transfers. His massive frame, 6'2" of Georgia farm boy muscle packed into desert camouflage, cast a shadow that swallowed her whole. "Captain Rodriguez?" His voice carried the flat professionalism of a man who'd learned not to get attached to the revolving door of officers who rotated through forward bases. "Welcome to Sentinel. You'll be working with Lieutenant Williams on supply coordination. He'll show you the ropes." Elena nodded, adjusting the strap of her laptop bag. "Thank you, Sergeant. Is there a current sitrep I can review? I like to understand the operational tempo before I start organizing logistics flows." Morrison's eyebrows raised slightly. Most supply officers asked about chow schedules and internet access, not situation reports. "Ma'am, that's more operational than logistical, but I can get you yesterday's briefing notes." "I'd appreciate that." Her voice was steady, unremarkable, but there was something in the way she scanned the base perimeter that caught Morrison's attention. Not nervous scanning, tactical scanning, the kind that cataloged fields of fire and dead space without conscious thought. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Lieutenant Williams appeared from the command bunker, clipboard in hand, looking harried. Fresh out of Quantico, maybe 23 years old, with the eager energy of someone still trying to prove himself worthy of his bars. His uniform was perfect, his boots polished to a mirror shine that would fade within a week in the Afghan dust. "Captain Rodriguez, I'm Tom Williams, your logistics counterpart. I've got your billeting assignment and a rundown of our current supply status." He paused, taking in her unassuming appearance. "Have you worked forward logistics before, ma'am?" "Some," Elena replied, accepting the clipboard. Her eyes moved quickly down the supply manifest, and Williams noticed she didn't just glance, she studied. Her pen made quick notations in the margins, adjustments to ammunition ratios that actually made sense. "You've got good instincts for supply prioritization," Williams admitted, impressed despite himself. "Most officers from the rear don't understand the ammunition burn rates for sustained contact." Elena looked up from the clipboard, and for just a moment, Williams caught something in her dark eyes, depth that didn't match her paperwork. "You learn to pay attention to what keeps people alive," she said simply. From across the compound, the sound of helicopters approaching drew their attention. 2 Black Hawks came in low and fast, their rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust that stung the eyes and coated everything in grit. As they touched down on the landing zone, Elena's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Her head tilted slightly, listening to the engine pitch with the focused attention of someone who understood aircraft systems. When one of the birds settled with a slight asymmetric vibration, she frowned. "That port engine's running rough," she observed to Williams, nodding toward the helicopter. Probably needs the fuel control unit checked. Could be a maintenance issue. Williams stared at her. Ma'am, how do you know that from here? Elena blinked, as if realizing she'd said something she shouldn't have. Just, you pick up things. Being around aircraft on supply runs. She turned back to the clipboard quickly. Should we continue the base tour? But Williams was studying her now with new interest. Supply officers didn't typically diagnose mechanical issues from engine sounds alone. That kind of knowledge came from extensive aircraft experience, pilot-level familiarity, not cargo manifest oversight. As they walked past the motor pool, Elena's gaze automatically cataloged the vehicles with professional efficiency. She noted the up-armored Humvees with their characteristic weight distribution, the MREs with their V-shaped hulls designed to deflect IED blasts, and the maintenance bay where mechanics worked on a disabled truck. One of the mechanics, a grimy corporal with oil-stained hands, was arguing with a sergeant about transmission problems. Elena slowed her pace, unconsciously listening to their technical discussion. It's not the transmission, she said quietly, almost to herself. That's differential whine, not gear grinding. Probably the ring and pinion. Both mechanics stopped talking and looked at her. The corporal wiped his hands on a rag, confusion written across his young face. Ma'am? Elena realized they'd heard her. Again, she'd revealed knowledge that didn't fit her cover. Sorry, mechanical things. My father was a mechanic. The sergeant, a weathered man with 20 years of military vehicle experience, walked over. Captain, with respect, what makes you think it's differential? For a moment, Elena hesitated. Then she pointed toward the truck. The whine only occurs under load, not during idle or rev. Transmission problems would present during gear changes regardless of load bearing. Differential problems are load dependent. The two mechanics exchanged glances. That wasn't general mechanical knowledge, it was specific, technical expertise delivered with the confidence of someone who diagnosed hundreds of similar problems. Ma'am, the corporal said slowly, have you worked motor pool before? No, Elena replied, but the lie felt thin even to bond her. Just, you pick things up. Williams was watching this exchange with growing curiosity. First aircraft maintenance, now vehicle diagnostics. Supply officers might have general familiarity with equipment, but this level of technical knowledge suggested hands-on experience that wasn't in her file. As they continued the tour, passing the communications center, Elena's trained ear caught fragments of radio chatter, grid coordinates, tactical call signs, operational frequencies that painted a picture of unit movements and mission status. She found herself automatically tracking the information, building a mental map of friendly positions and potential trouble spots. Her notebook, which Williams had assumed was for supply inventories, contained detailed sketches of the base layout with notes about defensive positions, fields of fire, and potential vulnerabilities. When he glimpsed the pages over her shoulder, the drawings were precise, architectural quality, with tactical annotations that no logistics officer should know how to make. Captain, Williams said carefully, your base assessment is very comprehensive. Elena looked down at her notes, realizing she'd been unconsciously conducting a defensive analysis rather than a supply survey. Force protection, she said lamely. Important for supply security. But Williams wasn't buying it anymore. Supply officers worried about inventory and delivery schedules. They didn't conduct tactical terrain analysis or diagnose aircraft maintenance issues from engine acoustics. Whatever Captain Rodriguez was, she wasn't just a logistics officer. As the afternoon wore on, small details accumulated, like evidence. The way she moved through the compound, with perfect situational awareness, never placing herself in tactical disadvantages. How she instinctively avoided creating skylining silhouettes against the walls. The professional manner in which she examined the defensive positions, noting overlapping fields of fire and dead space with the eye of someone who'd planned such things before. When they passed the armory, Elena's gaze lingered on the weapon racks with unmistakable familiarity. Not the nervous curiosity of someone uncomfortable around firearms, but the casual recognition of tools she knew well. Master Sergeant Hughes, the armorer, noticed her attention. A career Marine with multiple combat tours, Hughes had the weathered look of someone who'd seen everything twice. "Captain, you need to check out a sidearm for your deployment?" "That would be appropriate, Sergeant." Elena's response was professional, unremarkable. Hughes pulled a standard M9 Beretta from the rack, along with magazines and ammunition. Elena accepted the weapon with movements that were efficient, practiced, automatic. She conducted the safety check with the fluid motions of someone who'd handled pistols thousands of times, her fingers moving with muscle memory that couldn't be faked. The weapon seated in her holster like it belonged there, no adjustment period required. Hughes watched the entire process with growing interest. "Ma'am, you handle that piece like you've used one before. Basic training covers weapons familiarization," Elena replied, but even she could hear how inadequate that explanation sounded. "Yes, ma'am," Hughes agreed slowly. But that wasn't basic familiarity. That was expert handling. Williams was taking mental notes now, building a picture that didn't match Elena's file. Aircraft maintenance knowledge, vehicle diagnostics expertise, tactical base assessment, professional weapons handling. None of it individually conclusive, but together it painted a portrait of someone with far more military experience than a logistics transfer should possess. As the sun began to set over the Afghan mountains, casting long shadows across the compound, Elena stood near the defensive perimeter, ostensibly reviewing supply routes but actually studying the terrain beyond the wire. Her gaze moved methodically across the landscape, noting potential approach routes, defensive positions, and tactical considerations that had nothing to do with logistics. Williams approached quietly, his curiosity finally overcoming military courtesy. "Captain, can I ask you something?" Elena turned, her expression carefully neutral. "Of course, Lieutenant. Your experience seems broader than typical logistics background. Have you served in other capacities?" For a moment, Elena's carefully maintained facade slipped. In her dark eyes, Williams caught a glimpse of something deeper. Years of experience, command responsibility, and the weight of decisions that had nothing to do with supply schedules. "We all serve where we're needed, Lieutenant," she said finally. "Sometimes that means different roles at different times." It wasn't really an answer, but it was all she was prepared to give. Williams nodded, understanding that he'd reached the boundary of what she was willing to reveal. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that Captain Elena Rodriguez was carrying secrets that went far beyond logistics coordination. In her temporary quarters that night, Elena sat at the small field desk, working on her laptop. To anyone observing, she appeared to be updating supply inventories and logistics schedules. But on her screen, encrypted communications channels carried reports to contacts that weren't listed in any official military directory. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone accustomed to operational security, compartmentalized information, and chains of command that existed in shadows. Whatever mission had brought Captain Elena Rodriguez to FOB Sentinel, it had nothing to do with managing supply convoys. Outside her window, the night shift took their posts along the defensive perimeter. Guards who thought they were protecting a forward logistics base, unaware that they were hosting someone whose presence there represented preparations for something far more significant than supply coordination. Elena closed her laptop and sat back in the metal folding chair, allowing herself a moment to drop the facade. The muscles in her shoulders carried tension that came from maintaining a false identity, from constantly monitoring her words and actions to ensure they matched her cover story. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to reveal knowledge that didn't fit her supposed role. She would have to be more careful, more disciplined in maintaining the illusion that she was nothing more than a logistics officer assigned to a routine posting. But as she prepared for sleep, checking her sidearm and securing her communications equipment, Elena Rodriguez allowed herself a small smile. FOB Sentinel's personnel were beginning to notice inconsistencies in her story, asking questions that she couldn't answer without revealing more than her mission parameters allowed. Soon, she thought, the charade would become unnecessary. Soon, they would all discover exactly who Captain Elena Rodriguez really was, and why she had been positioned at this forward base at this particular time. The mission was just beginning. The morning briefing in FOB Sentinel's command bunker crackled with tension that had nothing to do with the war outside the wire. Major David Kellerman, the base commander, stood at the head of a table crowded with maps, satellite images, and the accumulated frustration of officers who'd been fighting the same battles for months without decisive results. Kellerman was career Army, a man who'd earned his rank through competence and political navigation in equal measure. At 42, his hair was prematurely gray, and his face bore the deep lines of someone who'd made life and death decisions for other people's sons and daughters. He commanded respect through a combination of tactical acumen and the kind of decisive leadership that kept forward bases functioning in hostile territory. But this morning, his usual composure was strained by reports that painted an increasingly grim tactical picture. Intelligence indicates increased insurgent activity in Grid Square 728 Alpha. Captain Morrison, the intelligence officer, reported while pointing to a map section highlighted in red. We're seeing coordinated movements suggesting preparation for a major offensive operation. Around the table, company commanders leaned forward, studying terrain features and tactical implications. These were serious officers, men who'd survived multiple deployments through combination of skill, caution, and the hard-earned wisdom that came from seeing too many good plans collapse under enemy contact. Elena Rodriguez sat quietly in the corner, taking notes in her leather notebook. Officially, she was present to coordinate logistics support for any planned operations. Unofficially, she was listening to operational details with the focused attention of someone who understood tactical planning at levels far above her supposed pay grade. Major Kellerman's voice cut through the murmur of tactical discussion. Charlie Company reports contact with approximately 200 insurgent fighters yesterday. They've withdrawn to defensive positions, but enemy forces are maintaining contact and appear to be fixing our units in place. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Mason, the deputy commander, was a thick-set man with the blunt manner of someone who'd risen through enlisted ranks before accepting a commission. His combat experience was extensive, his tactical knowledge proven through years of successful operations. But his approach to military problems was straightforward. Apply superior firepower until resistance collapsed. We need to push through with overwhelming force, Mason declared, stabbing a finger at the map. Hit them with everything we've got before they can consolidate positions. Elena looked up from her notebook, studying the terrain features Mason was indicating. Her professional assessment was immediate and troubling. The approach he advocated would channel friendly forces into a natural kill zone, where insurgent advantages would be maximized and American technological superiority would be negated. She remained silent, aware that logistics officers weren't expected to contribute tactical insights during operational planning sessions. Captain Harrison, Charlie Company's commander, was younger than his peers, but had earned his position through aggressive leadership and tactical innovation. His troops trusted him because he'd brought them through contacts where other units had suffered casualties. But his youth sometimes led to overconfidence in solutions that looked simple on paper. "I can get my boys through that valley," Harrison said with the confidence of someone who'd succeeded in similar operations. "We punch through fast, before they can react. In and out before they know what hit." Elena's pen stopped moving across her notebook page. The tactical situation Harrison described was textbook ambush terrain. A narrow valley with elevated positions, providing insurgent forces perfect fields of fire and multiple escape routes. What he was proposing wasn't a tactical operation, it was a death trap disguised as aggressive leadership. She cleared her throat quietly, preparing to offer the kind of tactical observation that might save lives. Major Kellerman noticed her movement and his expression shifted to mild irritation. Military briefings followed established protocols, and logistics officers didn't interrupt tactical discussions between combat commanders. "Captain Rodriguez," Kellerman said with the patient tone of someone addressing a subordinate who'd forgotten proper military courtesy. Is there a supply concern you need to address? Elena hesitated. Speaking up would mean revealing knowledge that didn't fit her cover identity. Remaining silent might mean watching good Marines walk into an ambush that could be avoided with proper tactical planning. Sir, she began carefully, reviewing the logistics requirements for the proposed route, I noticed some terrain challenges that might affect supply and evacuation capabilities. Mason turned toward her, with barely concealed annoyance. At 48, he'd commanded troops in combat operations across 3 different theaters. He had little patience for supply officers who tried to insert themselves into tactical discussions beyond their expertise. Captain, Mason said with deliberate emphasis on her rank. Logistics follows operations, not the other way around. We plan the mission, you provide the beans and bullets. Elena felt the familiar weight of maintaining her cover while watching a preventable disaster develop. Yes, sir, but terrain analysis affects logistics sustainability. That valley creates choke points that create tactical opportunities, Mason interrupted, his voice hardening. Captain, stick to your lane, leave the fighting to fighters. The dismissal was sharp and public, designed to remind everyone present of proper military hierarchy. Around the table, other officers avoided eye contact, some uncomfortable with Mason's tone but unwilling to challenge a superior officer's authority. Elena absorbed the rebuke without visible reaction, years of operational discipline allowing her to maintain composure despite frustration that burned in her chest. She'd seen this pattern before. Overconfident commanders dismissing critical input because it came from the wrong source, leading to operational failures that cost lives. Captain Harrison, encouraged by Mason's support, became more animated in his tactical advocacy. We go in fast and hard, he said, enthusiasm building. Charlie Company can handle anything those insurgents throw at us. They're not expecting aggressive action. Elena's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Harrison was describing exactly the kind of tactical thinking that got Marines killed, substituting aggression for analysis, confidence for tactical preparation. Morrison, the intelligence officer, added his assessment with professional detachment. Enemy forces appear to be standard insurgent composition. Mostly small arms, some RPGs, basic tactics, nothing our people can't handle with proper fire support. Elena knew Morrison was wrong. The intelligence assessment was superficial, based on conventional threat evaluation that missed indicators of more sophisticated opposition. But pointing out intelligence failures would require revealing analytical capabilities that didn't match her supposed logistics background. Lieutenant Williams, who'd been observing Elena's reaction to the tactical discussion, noticed her obvious discomfort with the operational plan. During their previous day together, he'd observed knowledge and expertise that didn't match typical logistics training. Now, watching her struggle with information she clearly wanted to share but couldn't, his suspicions deepened. Major Kellerman was reviewing timelines and coordination requirements, moving toward operational approval despite obvious tactical problems. Elena realized that intervention was becoming necessary, regardless of cover story implications. Sir, she said again, voice slightly louder this time. The terrain analysis suggests. Mason slammed his hand on the table, the sharp crack echoing through the bunker. Every conversation stopped. His face was flushed with anger, the kind of rage that came from having his authority questioned by someone he considered unqualified to participate in tactical discussions. Captain Rodriguez, Mason's voice was cold and controlled, more dangerous than shouting. You are a supply officer, a logistics coordinator, a rear echelon support person whose job is to count beans and move boxes. You are not a tactical planner, an intelligence analyst, or a combat commander. Elena felt the weight of every eye in the room, the uncomfortable silence of officers watching a public dressing down that was probably deserved but unnecessarily harsh. Mason continued, his voice gaining momentum. I don't know what kind of briefings you attended in the rear, what kind of tactical wisdom you think you picked up from PowerPoint presentations and field manuals, but this is actual combat operations. Real Marines are about to put their lives on the line based on decisions made by people with actual combat experience. The insult was carefully constructed, questioning not just her tactical knowledge but her courage, her experience, and her right to participate in decisions that affected combat troops. "So here's what's going to happen," Mason said, standing to his full height and using his physical presence to dominate the space. "You're going to sit quietly in that corner, take notes about whatever supplies we might need, and let the actual warriors handle the actual war. Is that understood?" Elena met his gaze steadily, absorbing the humiliation without flinching. Around the table, she could see a mix of reactions. Some officers clearly uncomfortable with Mason's tone, others nodding in agreement that she'd overstepped proper boundaries. "Understood, sir," she replied, voice level and professional. Mason sat back down, satisfied that he'd re-established proper military hierarchy. "Outstanding. Now, can we continue planning an operation without further interruption from the supply department?" A few officers chuckled, the tension in the room dissipating as attention returned to tactical matters. Elena opened her notebook and resumed taking notes, but Williams noticed that her handwriting had changed. What had been careful logistics annotations were now precise tactical assessments, complete with grid coordinates and tactical terminology that no supply officer should know. Captain Harrison continued his operational keep-in briefing with renewed confidence, outlining approach routes and assault timelines that would commit Charlie Company to terrain where insurgent advantages would be overwhelming. Elena listened to every detail, her professional assessment growing more alarmed with each tactical decision. The operation Harrison described would result in heavy casualties, possibly complete unit destruction, but her ability to prevent disaster had been eliminated by Mason's public humiliation and clear directive to remain silent. As the briefing continued, Elena found herself in an impossible position, possessing critical information that could save lives, but unable to share it without revealing capabilities that would compromise her actual mission at FOB Sentinel. Morrison concluded his intelligence brief with assessments that Elena knew were dangerously incomplete. The insurgent force strength was higher than estimated, their tactical capability more sophisticated than acknowledged, and their preparation more thorough than intelligence suggested. But she was just a supply officer, relegated to logistics coordination and explicitly ordered to avoid tactical input. Major Kellerman began reviewing final coordination details, moving toward operational approval despite gaps in planning that would prove fatal under enemy contact. Elena realized she was watching a preventable disaster develop while being powerless to prevent it. Williams caught her eye across the table, his expression questioning. During their time together, he'd observed knowledge and expertise that didn't match her supposed background. Now, seeing her obvious distress at tactical decisions she couldn't influence, his suspicions were hardening into certainty. Whatever Captain Elena Rodriguez really was, she wasn't a supply officer, and whatever knowledge she possessed about the tactical situation Charlie Company was walking into, it was information that could save lives if anyone was willing to listen. But Lieutenant Colonel Mason had made it clear that her input wasn't welcome. Her opinions weren't valued, and her role was limited to logistics support. The tactical planning would proceed without benefit of whatever insights she might have offered. As the briefing concluded and officers began filing out to prepare for operations, Elena remained seated, staring at her notebook where detailed tactical assessments sat unused beside official logistics notes. For the second time in her military career, she was being forced to watch good Marines walk into disaster because command structure and cover identity prevented her from sharing information that could save lives. The weight of that knowledge, and the helplessness that came with being unable to act on it, settled on her shoulders like a physical burden she would carry until the operation was complete and the casualties were counted. Lieutenant Williams found Elena Rodriguez in the motor pool 3 hours after the disastrous briefing, her uniform sleeves rolled up, hands covered in hydraulic fluid as she worked beneath the hood of a disabled Humvee. Her movements were precise and confident, the actions of someone who'd performed similar diagnostics countless times before. The sight stopped Williams short. Supply officers didn't typically repair vehicles. They coordinated parts requisition and maintenance schedules. But Elena was deep into the engine compartment, using tools with the practiced efficiency of an experienced mechanic. "Captain," Williams called out, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and growing suspicion. "What exactly are you doing?" Elena emerged from beneath the hood, wiping grease from her hands with a shop rag. Her face showed concentration that gradually shifted to awareness that she'd again revealed capabilities that didn't match her cover story. "The motor pool sergeant mentioned they were having transmission problems," she said, attempting to sound casual. "I thought I'd take a look, see if it was something simple that could get this vehicle back in service quickly." Williams moved closer, studying the engine compartment where Elena had been working. Tools were arranged with military precision, diagnostic procedures had been followed with textbook accuracy, and several components showed signs of recent adjustment by someone who clearly understood complex vehicle systems. "Captain," Williams said slowly, "this isn't transmission work. You've been diagnosing electrical systems." Elena looked down at her hands, still stained with evidence of technical work that went far beyond supply officer training. "I've always been interested in mechanical things." But Williams wasn't buying the explanation anymore. During their day together, he'd observed aircraft maintenance knowledge, vehicle diagnostics expertise, tactical base assessments, and professional weapons handling that painted a picture of someone with far more military experience than her file suggested. "Ma'am, with respect, that's not amateur interest. That's professional-level diagnostic work. Where did you learn electrical systems at this level?" Elena hesitated, weighing how much truth she could reveal without compromising her mission. "My father was career Army. Motor pool maintenance. I grew up around this equipment." It was partially true. Her father had been military. But he'd been a helicopter pilot, not a mechanic, and her own mechanical knowledge came from years of maintaining aircraft under field conditions where understanding every system could mean the difference between successful mission completion and catastrophic failure. Williams studied her face, looking for tells that would confirm his growing suspicion that Captain Rodriguez wasn't who she claimed to be. "Captain, yesterday you diagnosed aircraft engine problems from acoustic signatures. Today, you're performing complex vehicle electrical diagnostics. That's not inherited knowledge. That's hands-on, professional experience." Elena straightened, meeting his gaze with the composed expression she'd maintained throughout her undercover assignment. "Lieutenant, I appreciate your curiosity about my background, but I'm here to coordinate logistics support. That's my mission and my focus." But even as she deflected his questions, Williams could see something else in her eyes. The weight of knowledge she wanted to share but couldn't, the frustration of someone who possessed critical capabilities but was constrained by circumstances beyond his understanding. From across the motor pool, Sergeant Jenkins approached with the confident walk of someone who'd spent 20 years keeping military vehicles operational under impossible conditions. His weathered hands carried the stains and scars of decades working with machinery that had been designed for abuse and operated beyond its limits. "Captain," Jenkins said, his voice carrying genuine appreciation, "I don't know where you learned electrical diagnostics, but you just fixed a problem that's been keeping this Humvee down for 2 weeks. My best mechanic couldn't figure out what you spotted in 15 minutes. Elena felt the familiar weight of exposure, another moment where her actions revealed capabilities that didn't match her supposed role. "Sometimes fresh eyes help," she said lamely. Jenkins laughed, the rough sound of someone who'd heard every excuse and explanation the military could generate. "Ma'am, with respect, that wasn't fresh eyes. That was expert-level troubleshooting. You bypassed 3 diagnostic steps that would have taken my people hours. Went straight to the actual problem and fixed it like you'd done it 100 times before." Williams was taking mental notes again, adding vehicle electrical systems to the growing list of Elena's unexplained expertise. Aircraft maintenance, tactical analysis, weapons handling, and now complex mechanical diagnostics, none of it individually conclusive, but together painting a portrait of someone whose military experience extended far beyond logistics coordination. Elena wiped the remaining grease from her hands, aware that every moment of this conversation was deepening William's suspicions about her true identity and purpose at FOB Sentinel. "Sergeant Jenkins," she said, hoping to deflect attention from her own capabilities, "what's the overall vehicle readiness status? I need to factor maintenance availability into supply planning." Jenkins pulled a worn notebook from his cargo pocket, consulting maintenance logs, with the practiced efficiency of someone who tracked dozens of vehicles across multiple systems. "We've got 60% operational readiness on Humvees, 75% on MREs. The biggest problems are electrical systems and transmission components, parts that take weeks to requisition and require specialized knowledge to install properly." Elena found herself nodding with understanding that came from years of maintaining equipment under field conditions where proper parts weren't available and improvisation was essential for operational success. "Have you considered cross-wiring electrical systems from damaged vehicles?" she asked, the suggestion emerging from professional knowledge before she could stop herself. "Sometimes you can cannibalize components to keep critical vehicles operational." Both Jenkins and Williams stared at her. Scavenging parts was standard military practice, but knowing which electrical components could be safely cross-wired required detailed understanding of vehicle electrical architectures that supply officers weren't expected to possess. "Ma'am," Jenkins said carefully, "that's exactly the kind of solution my people have been trying to figure out, but it requires knowing which systems are compatible and which modifications won't cause cascading electrical failures." Elena realized she was again revealing knowledge that didn't fit her cover story. "Just common sense," she said. But the explanation sounded weak even to her. Williams was studying her with undisguised curiosity now, his suspicions crystallizing into certainty that Captain Rodriguez was operating under some kind of false identity for reasons he couldn't yet understand. From the communications bunker, radio chatter crackled with reports of increased insurgent activity in the sectors where Charlie Company would be operating. Elena's trained ear automatically processed grid coordinates, tactical call signs, and operational frequencies that painted a disturbing picture of enemy preparation for the kind of major operation that could devastate an unprepared American unit. Her expression tightened as she listened to reports that confirmed her tactical assessment from the morning briefing. The insurgent forces weren't standard fighters with basic tactics. They were coordinated, well-equipped, and prepared for sustained combat operations against superior American firepower. Williams noticed her reaction to the radio traffic. "Captain, is there something about those reports that concerns you from a logistics perspective?" Elena hesitated, torn between maintaining her cover and addressing obvious tactical problems that could result in heavy casualties. Supply lines could be vulnerable if enemy forces are more organized than intelligence assessments suggest. It was a safe response, the kind of logistics concern that would be appropriate for her supposed role. But Williams could see deeper knowledge in her expression, understanding of tactical implications that went far beyond supply security. "Captain," Williams said quietly, moving closer so their conversation wouldn't be overheard. "What aren't you telling me? Yesterday you knew aircraft maintenance. Today you're diagnosing vehicle electrical systems. And right now, you look like someone who's reading tactical intelligence that doesn't match official assessments." Elena met his gaze, weighing how much truth she could reveal without compromising operational security. Williams was clearly intelligent, observant, and increasingly suspicious of her cover story. But her mission parameters required maintaining false identity until circumstances made revelation necessary. "Lieutenant," she said finally, "sometimes military experience is broader than official assignments might suggest. But my current role is logistics coordination, and that's where I need to focus my attention." Williams nodded slowly, understanding that he'd reached another boundary of what she was willing to reveal. but his certainty was growing that Captain Elena Rodriguez possessed capabilities and knowledge that were entirely inconsistent with supply officer training. As afternoon wore into evening, reports continued arriving from sectors where Charlie Company would be operating. Elena found herself automatically tracking tactical developments, building a mental picture of enemy dispositions, friendly vulnerabilities, that painted an increasingly alarming operational picture. The insurgent forces were demonstrating coordination and tactical sophistication that suggested months of preparation for sustained combat operations. Intelligence assessments that characterized them as standard fighters with basic capabilities were dangerously incomplete. But Elena's position as a supply officer gave her no official avenue to share tactical insights that could prevent a disaster she could see developing. Her morning confrontation with Lieutenant Colonel Mason had made clear that her input wasn't welcome in operational planning. Williams observed her growing tension as radio reports continued painting a picture of enemy preparation that didn't match official intelligence assessments. Whatever knowledge Captain Rodriguez possessed about tactical matters, it was information that was causing her obvious distress as she watched operational planning proceed without benefit of her insights. That evening, as Elena worked late in the logistics office, updating supply inventories and coordination schedules, Williams found her reviewing maps with the kind of detailed attention that suggested tactical analysis rather than logistics planning. Her notebook, which he'd assumed contained supply information, was filled with precise tactical assessments, grid coordinates, and operational notes that demonstrated professional military knowledge far beyond supply officer training. "Captain," Williams said quietly, "I think we need to talk." Elena looked up from maps covered with tactical annotations that she'd been unconsciously adding throughout the day. Her cover was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain as circumstances forced revelations of capabilities that didn't match her supposed background. "About what, Lieutenant?" Williams closed the office door, ensuring privacy for a conversation that was likely to challenge official military hierarchy and possibly reveal information that would change everything about her assignment at FOB Sentinel. "About who you really are," Williams said simply, "and why someone with your knowledge and capabilities is pretending to be a supply officer at a forward base where a major operation is about to go catastrophically wrong." Elena stared at him for a long moment, weighing operational security against the growing certainty that maintaining her cover might cost lives. When Charlie Company walked into the disaster she could see coming but was powerless to prevent. Outside, night was falling over the Afghan mountains, and radio reports continued describing enemy preparations for the kind of sustained combat operation that could devastate an unprepared American unit. The time for maintaining false identity was running out, and Elena Rodriguez would soon have to decide whether her mission was more important than the lives of Marines who were about to walk into an ambush that proper tactical planning could prevent. In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors carried across the base as evening supply runs returned from forward positions. Elena listened to engine sounds with the unconscious professional assessment of someone whose experience with aircraft went far beyond logistics coordination. Williams watched her reaction to the helicopters with growing certainty that whatever Captain Rodriguez's real background might be, it included capabilities that could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure for the operation Charlie Company was about to undertake. The question was whether circumstances would force her to reveal those capabilities before it was too late to prevent a disaster that everyone except her seemed unable to see coming. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for her carefully maintained cover to slip, and new pressure to choose between operational security and the lives of Marines who trusted their commanders to make tactical decisions based on complete and accurate information. Elena Rodriguez closed her notebook, securing tactical assessments that could save lives if anyone was willing to listen to a supply officer, whose knowledge and capabilities suggested she was far more than her official assignment indicated. The mission was about to become much more complicated than anyone at FOB Sentinel could imagine. Asterisk, 280 Marines were trapped behind enemy lines. She broke every rule and brought them home. Asterisk. The The first indication of disaster came at 0347 hours through radio static that crackled with panic and gunfire. Elena Rodriguez jerked awake in her narrow cot, instantly alert as years of combat experience triggered automatic responses to the sound of troops in contact. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Charlie 6. Captain Harrison's voice broke through interference, strain evident despite his attempts to maintain military composure. "We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Grid, 40 Sierra Papa Delta 738 Request immediate fire support and extraction." Elena was on her feet before the transmission ended, muscle memory overriding conscious thought as she reached for gear that wasn't there. Her cover identity as a logistics officer meant standard equipment, not the specialized kit she'd carried during operational deployments when radio calls like this meant life or death for surrounded units. In the command bunker, chaos erupted as duty officers scrambled to process reports that painted an increasingly desperate tactical picture. The confident operation that Lieutenant Colonel Mason had authorized 12 hours earlier was collapsing into the disaster Elena had predicted during the morning briefing. "Charlie 6, this is Sentinel Base." Major Kellerman's voice carried the controlled tension of a commander receiving his worst fears confirmed. "Report your status and casualties." Harrison's response came through bursts of automatic weapons fire that created a deadly percussion backdrop to his words. "We walked into a prepared ambush. Enemy strength approximately 400 fighters in prepared positions. We have multiple casualties, ammunition running low, and no viable extraction routes." 400 fighters. Elena's professional assessment had estimated 350 to 400 based on intelligence indicators that Morrison's team had either missed or dismissed. Now Charlie Company was paying the price for tactical planning that had ignored enemy capabilities in favor of aggressive timelines. She pulled on her uniform quickly, knowing that her logistics role required presence in the command center during any major operation. But as she dressed, Elena's mind was already shifting from cover identity to operational assessment, analyzing the tactical situation with capabilities that went far beyond supply coordination. The radio chatter continued painting a picture of surrounded Marines fighting for survival against overwhelming odds. Grid coordinates placed Charlie Company exactly where Elena had known they would be vulnerable, in the narrow valley where insurgent forces could maximize their advantages while negating American technological superiority. "Sentinel Base. We need immediate air support." Harrison's voice cracked with desperation. "They've got us pinned in a box canyon with no cover. We can't hold this position much longer." Elena was running now, boots striking concrete, as she headed for the command bunker, where tactical decisions would be made that could save or doom 280 Marines who'd walked into the ambush she'd been unable to prevent. Inside the bunker, the scene was controlled chaos. Officers hunched over maps and radio equipment, their faces illuminated by the green glow of tactical displays that showed Charlie Company as a cluster of blue dots surrounded by estimated enemy positions marked in threatening red. Major Kellerman stood at the center of activity, his usual composure strained by reports that kept getting worse. Lieutenant Colonel Mason was nowhere to be seen, probably still sleeping, confident that his tactical plan would proceed without complications. "What's our air support availability?" Kellerman demanded. Captain Morrison consulted his coordination board with the mechanical precision of someone delivering bad news he'd verified multiple times. "Negative air assets available, sir. 2 Apaches are down for maintenance. 1 Cobra is at Kandahar for parts, and the Air Force is socked in by weather at Bagram." Elena felt ice form in her stomach. No close air support meant Charlie Company was fighting alone against prepared positions that intelligence had characterized as basic insurgent capabilities. The tactical situation was rapidly becoming unsurvivable. "Ground reinforcement options?" Kellerman continued, working through alternatives as radio reports described increasing enemy pressure against Charlie Company's defensive perimeter. "1st Battalion is engaged in operations 30 clicks north," Morrison replied. 2nd Battalion is scattered across 3 forward bases conducting routine patrols. We'd need 6 hours minimum to consolidate sufficient force for relief operations. 6 hours. Elena knew Charlie Company had maybe 1 hour of effective resistance left before ammunition expenditure and casualty rates made their position untenable. Without immediate intervention, 280 Marines were going to die in the valley where she'd known they would be vulnerable. Lieutenant Williams entered the bunker, his face grim as he took in the tactical situation. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and Elena saw recognition there, understanding that the disaster unfolding was exactly what she'd tried to warn against during yesterday's briefing. Charlie 6, this is Sentinel Base, Kellerman tried again. Can you withdraw to more defensible terrain? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Harrison's response came through sustained gunfire that made communication difficult. Negative withdrawal options. They've got overwatch positions covering all approaches. We're surrounded with approximately 50% casualties. Need immediate assistance, or we're going to be overrun. 50% casualties. Elena closed her eyes briefly, calculating what that meant in human terms. 140 Marines dead or wounded, another 140 fighting desperately against overwhelming odds with limited ammunition and no support. The tactical display showed Charlie Company's position with merciless clarity, surrounded in terrain that favored defenders, facing enemy forces that outnumbered them almost 2-to-1, with no air support and no viable reinforcement options. It was a textbook example of tactical disaster, the kind of situation that resulted from overconfidence, inadequate intelligence, and dismissal of warning signs that had been clearly visible to anyone with professional military experience. Elena found herself moving toward the tactical display, studying terrain features and enemy dispositions with the automatic assessment of someone whose operational background went far beyond logistics coordination. The situation was desperate, but not hopeless. If proper tactical assets were available and employed with precision timing. Williams noticed her intense focus on the tactical situation. Throughout their brief partnership, he'd observed knowledge and capabilities that didn't match her supposed background. Now, watching her analyze the crisis with obvious professional competence, his suspicions were crystallizing into certainty. "Captain Rodriguez," Williams said quietly, moving closer so their conversation wouldn't be overheard. "You predicted this yesterday. You knew exactly what would happen." Elena met his gaze, aware that maintaining her cover story was becoming impossible as circumstances forced revelation of capabilities that no supply officer would possess. The tactical indicators were obvious to anyone with operational experience. "But you're not supposed to have operational experience," Williams pressed. "You're a logistics officer. Except yesterday, you demonstrated aircraft maintenance knowledge, vehicle diagnostics expertise, and tactical analysis capabilities that don't match your file." Elena looked back at the tactical display where Charlie Company's situation was deteriorating in real time. Radio reports described increasing enemy pressure, ammunition shortages, and casualty rates that would soon make the position unsustainable. "Lieutenant," she said finally, "there are aspects of military service that don't always appear in official records." Williams studied her face, reading confirmation of suspicions he'd been developing since her arrival at FOB Sentinel. "Captain, I think you're the only person in this bunker who understands what Charlie Company needs to survive the next hour." Elena felt the weight of decision approaching, the moment when cover identity would have to be abandoned in favor of tent capabilities that could save lives. Her mission parameters required maintaining false identity, but her oath as a Marine demanded action when fellow warriors faced annihilation. "Charlie 6, this is Sentinel Base." Kellerman's voice carried growing desperation as tactical options narrowed. "We are working multiple solutions for immediate support. Maintain position and continue resistance." Harrison's response was barely audible through sustained automatic weapons fire. "Understood. But ammunition is critical. We need something now, or we're going to be overrun within the hour." Elena looked around the command bunker at officers who'd received the best tactical training the military could provide, but were constrained by limited assets and conventional thinking that couldn't address the crisis Charlie Company faced. Her professional assessment was immediate and clear. The tactical situation required unconventional solutions, employing assets and capabilities that officially didn't exist at FOB Sentinel. But Elena Rodriguez had access to resources that weren't listed in any official inventory. The decision point was arriving faster than anticipated. Soon, she would have to choose between maintaining cover identity and saving the lives of 280 Marines who were fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. Williams was watching her internal struggle, understanding that whatever Captain Rodriguez's real background might be, she possessed capabilities that could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure for Charlie Company. "Captain," Williams said quietly, "whatever you're really doing here, whatever your actual mission might be, those Marines need help that nobody else in this bunker can provide." Elena nodded, slowly, feeling the familiar weight of decision that had defined her operational career. Moments when protocol and regulations had to yield to mission requirements and the preservation of life. From across the bunker, Major Kellerman's voice cut through tactical discussions that were producing no viable solutions. "I need options, people. Charlie Company is surrounded and taking casualties. We need immediate action or we're going to lose an entire company." Elena Rodriguez took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would end her cover mission and reveal capabilities that would change everything about her assignment at FOB Sentinel. But 280 Marines were dying in a valley where she'd known they would be vulnerable, and saving their lives was more important than any covert operation she'd been sent to conduct. The time for pretending to be a logistics officer was over. "Sir," Elena's voice cut through the tactical discussion with quiet authority that made every officer in the bunker turn to look at her. "I have assets that can provide immediate assistance to Charlie Company." Major Kellerman stared at her, confusion evident on his weathered face. "Captain Rodriguez, what assets?" "Your logistics coordination." Elena Rodriguez straightened to her full height, and for the first time since arriving at FOB Sentinel, she dropped the carefully maintained facade of a supply officer, uncertain of her place among combat veterans. When she spoke again, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command decisions under extreme pressure. "Sir, I have access to aircraft and operational capabilities that aren't reflected in official base inventories." The bunker fell silent, except for the continued radio chatter from Charlie Company's desperate situation. Williams felt his suspicions confirmed. Whatever Captain Rodriguez really was, she'd been operating under false identity since arriving at the base. Lieutenant Colonel Mason chose that moment to enter the command bunker, having been awakened by reports of the tactical disaster his planning had created. His face was flushed with anger and embarrassment, the expression of someone whose overconfidence had led to preventable catastrophe. "What's the situation?" Mason demanded, his voice carrying defensive aggression that suggested he was already preparing to shift blame for the operational failure. "Charlie Company is surrounded and taking heavy casualties," Kellerman reported tersely. "No air support available, no ground reinforcement possible for hours. Captain Rodriguez claims to have assets that could provide immediate assistance." Mason's attention focused on Elena with the hostile intensity of someone whose authority had been questioned by a subordinate he'd publicly dismissed the previous day. "Captain Rodriguez," Mason's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Exactly what magical assets does a supply officer have access to that the rest of us don't know about?" Elena met his gaze with steady composure, aware that the next few minutes would either save Charlie Company or end her military career. "Sir, I have a helicopter gunship and pilot capabilities to conduct immediate extraction operations." The silence that followed was profound. Every officer in the bunker stared at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to growing understanding that Captain Rodriguez wasn't who she'd claimed to be. Mason's face cycled through confusion, anger, and dawning realization that the logistics officer he'd dismissed possessed capabilities that could have prevented the disaster Charlie Company was experiencing. "That's impossible," Mason said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're a supply officer. Supply officers don't fly gunships." Elena reached into her cargo pocket and withdrew a small leather wallet, placing it on the tactical display where everyone could see. Inside was a military ID card that bore her photograph but contained information that didn't match her supposed assignment to FOB Sentinel. Williams leaned forward to read the identification, his eyes widening as he processed information that explained everything he'd observed since her arrival. "Captain Elena Rodriguez," Williams read aloud, his voice carrying disbelief and growing respect. 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. MH-6M Little Bird qualified. Combat flight hours 847. Deployments: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia. The Night Stalkers. Elena Rodriguez was a member of the Army's most elite aviation unit, the secretive organization that provided helicopter support for special operations forces when conventional assets couldn't accomplish the mission. Mason's face went white as he processed the implications. For 24 hours, he'd been dismissing tactical input from someone whose qualifications exceeded his own, whose combat experience dwarfed most officers in the command bunker. "Ghost," Williams whispered, recognition dawning as he connected her call sign with operational legends he'd heard whispered in military circles. "You're Ghost." Elena nodded slowly, her cover identity finally abandoned. "Captain Elena Ghost Rodriguez, 160th SOAR. I've been conducting classified assessment operations at forward bases to evaluate tactical preparedness for special operations support." Major Kellerman leaned forward, studying her identification with growing understanding. Assessment operations that would explain aircraft maintenance knowledge, vehicle diagnostics capabilities, and tactical analysis expertise far beyond logistics training. "Yes, sir," Elena confirmed. "And yesterday's tactical briefing revealed deficiencies in intelligence assessment and operational planning that I was required to evaluate and report." Mason's defensive anger was rapidly shifting to panicked realization that his dismissal of her tactical input had contributed to the disaster Charlie Company was experiencing. "The tactical concerns you raised yesterday," Kellerman said slowly. "Those weren't logistics observations. Those were professional military assessments from someone with special operations experience." Elena looked at the tactical display where Charlie Company's situation continued deteriorating. "Sir, the enemy force composition and tactical positioning I observed in intelligence briefings indicated sophisticated preparation for sustained combat operations. The operation as planned was tactically unsound." Williams was connecting pieces with growing amazement. "Your mechanical knowledge, the vehicle diagnostics, the aircraft maintenance expertise. That's from maintaining special operations aircraft under field conditions. 160th aircraft require pilots who understand every system," Elena confirmed. "We maintain our own birds because mission success depends on capabilities that conventional maintenance can't provide." Mason found his voice, though it carried none of his previous arrogance. "You've been here conducting classified assessment while pretending to be a supply officer." "Yes, sir. Assessment operations require cover identities to observe actual command decision-making without influencing normal procedures." Elena's voice remained professional, despite the obvious implication that those decisions had proven catastrophically flawed. Kellerman was studying her identification more closely, noting details that confirmed her special operations background. Combat flight hours in multiple theaters, special operations qualifications, classified mission experience. "Captain, what aircraft do you have access to?" Elena reached for her encrypted communications device, a piece of equipment that Williams now realized was far more sophisticated than standard military issue. MH-6M Little Bird positioned 12 kilometers south of this location, fully armed, fueled, and ready for immediate deployment. The implications hit everyone in the bunker simultaneously. Elena Rodriguez, possessed exactly the capabilities needed to provide immediate assistance to Charlie Company. A special operations helicopter gunship, and the elite pilot training required to conduct extraction operations under extreme combat conditions. Mason's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. You could have prevented this entire situation if I'd listened to your tactical assessment yesterday. Elena looked at him with an expression that held no anger, only the professional assessment of someone who'd seen overconfidence lead to preventable disasters throughout her career. Sir, tactical decisions are command responsibility. My role was assessment and evaluation. But Williams could see deeper knowledge in her expression. Understanding that 280 Marines were dying because pride and hierarchy had prevented proper consideration of critical agreeing, tactical input. From the radio, Charlie Company's situation continued deteriorating as ammunition shortages and mounting casualties weakened their defensive capabilities. Charlie 6, this is Sentinel Base. Kellerman tried again. What's your current ammunition status? Harrison's response came through increasing static and gunfire. Winchester on all crew-served weapons. Small arms down to final magazines. We need immediate assistance or position becomes untenable within 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Elena looked at the tactical display. Calculating flight time, approach routes, and extraction procedures that could save Charlie Company if conventional protocols were abandoned in favor of special operations capabilities. Sir, Elena said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under pressure. I can have Charlie Company extracted within 45 minutes, but it requires authorization for immediate deployment using non-standard assets and tactical procedures. Kellerman met her gaze, understanding that he was being offered a solution that could save 280 Marines but would require trusting capabilities and procedures that existed outside normal military channels. What do you need? He asked simply. Elena was already moving toward her communications equipment, fingers flying across encrypted controls with practiced efficiency. Flight clearance for immediate departure, tactical frequency coordination, and authorization to employ all necessary force for mission accomplishment. Williams watched her transformation from uncertain supply officer to confident special operations aviator, finally understanding why her knowledge and capabilities had seemed inconsistent with her supposed assignment. Ghost, he said quietly, using her operational call sign with new respect. Bring them home. Elena Rodriguez smiled grimly, her true identity finally revealed as she prepared to employ capabilities that could turn disaster into salvation for Charlie Company. That's what Night Stalkers do, she said simply, then keyed her encrypted communications device to initiate the most dangerous extraction operation of her career. The pretense was over. Captain Elena Ghost Rodriguez was about to remind everyone at FOB Sentinel what elite military aviation looked like when 280 Marines needed someone willing to break every rule to bring them home. Section 6. The verification Elena's encrypted communications device crackled to life as she entered authentication codes that connected her to resources invisible to conventional military networks. The display showed grid coordinates, tactical frequencies, and operational parameters for assets that officially didn't exist within standard command structures. Shadow Base. This is Ghost. She transmitted with the crisp professionalism of someone conducting classified operations. Authentication code Whiskey 7 Alpha 9. Request immediate operational status on package Delta. Lieutenant Williams watched in fascination as Elena operated equipment and used procedures that revealed the depth of her special operations background. The woman who'd spent 2 days pretending to struggle with supply inventories was communicating with the calm efficiency of an elite military operator. Ghost, this is Shadow Base, a voice responded through encrypted channels. Package Delta is green and ready. MH6, M Little Bird, fully armed with standard special operations configuration. Fuel state sufficient for 2 hours operational deployment. Major Kellerman leaned closer, trying to understand communications that referenced capabilities not listed in any official FOB Sentinel inventory. Captain, explain package Delta. Elena looked up from her communications device. Her transformation from supply officer to special operations aviator now complete. MH-6M Little Bird attack helicopter. Twin M134 miniguns, 7-shot rocket pods, and enhanced armor package. Pre-positioned for classified assessment operations. The technical specifications meant nothing to most officers in the bunker, but Williams had enough aviation background to understand the significance. The MH-6M was the special operations variant of the Little Bird, modified for missions requiring precision firepower and extreme maneuverability in hostile environments. Classified assessment operations, Mason repeated slowly, his voice carrying the weight of someone finally understanding the scope of his mistake. You've been conducting special operations evaluation while I dismissed your input as supply officer inexperience. Elena's expression remained professionally neutral, despite the obvious implication that Mason's tactical planning had failed assessment criteria established by Special Operations Command. Sir, assessment parameters are classified, but the tactical situation Charlie Company faces requires immediate intervention using available assets. From the tactical radio, Harrison's voice cracked through increasing static and gunfire. Sentinel Base, we are being overrun. Enemy forces are advancing on multiple positions. We need immediate assistance, or we're going to be completely surrounded. Elena was already moving, checking gear, and preparing for immediate deployment. Sir, I need flight authorization for immediate departure. Charlie Company has maybe 20 minutes before their position becomes untenable. Kellerman looked at the tactical display, where Charlie Company's situation was deteriorating by the minute. Conventional assets weren't available. Standard procedures couldn't address the crisis, and 280 Marines were about to be annihilated unless unconventional capabilities were employed immediately. Authorization granted, Kellerman said without hesitation. What support do you need? Elena was checking her sidearm and communications equipment with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd conducted similar operations under extreme conditions. Tactical frequency coordination and standing orders to engage any forces threatening Charlie Company. Williams realized he was watching someone prepare for single-handed combat operations against overwhelming odds. Captain, you're talking about flying alone into a combat zone with 400 insurgent fighters. That's a suicide mission. Elena looked at him with the calm expression of someone who'd accepted risks far beyond normal military experience. Lieutenant, Special Operations Aviation exists specifically for situations where conventional assets can't accomplish the mission. She turned to address the entire command bunker, her voice carrying authority that commanded attention from every officer present. Gentlemen, Charlie Company walked into an ambush because intelligence assessments underestimated enemy capabilities and tactical planning ignored terrain disadvantages. Standard extraction procedures can't address their current situation. Mason's face was pale as he processed the full implications of Elena's assessment. You're saying the entire operation was flawed from conception? Sir, the tactical indicators were clear to anyone with special operations experience. Elena replied diplomatically. Enemy force composition, terrain analysis, and operational timing all suggested the mission exceeded conventional unit capabilities. Kellerman was studying Elena's military identification more closely, noting details that confirmed her special operations background. Captain Rodriguez, your file shows classified mission experience across multiple theaters. What kind of operations have you conducted? Elena hesitated briefly, weighing operational security against the need to establish credibility for the mission she was about to undertake. Personnel recovery, direct action support, and deep penetration reconnaissance. Missions requiring precision helicopter support in hostile environments. Williams felt his understanding of Elena's capabilities expanding as he processed her operational background. Personnel recovery means you've conducted extractions under combat conditions similar to Charlie Company's situation. Multiple times. Elena confirmed. though usually with better intelligence and tactical preparation than current circumstances provide. Her encrypted communications device buzzed with incoming updates from Shadow Base. Elena reviewed operational data with a quick assessment of someone accustomed to rapidly changing tactical situations. Package Delta is airborne and en route to forward staging area, she reported. Estimated arrival at Charlie Company's position in 35 minutes, assuming immediate departure from current location. Mason found his voice, though it carried none of his previous confidence. Captain, I need to understand the full scope of what you're proposing. You're talking about single aircraft assault against prepared enemy positions. Elena met his gaze with steady professionalism that carried subtle rebuke for tactical decisions that had created the current crisis. Sir, MH-6M capabilities include precision firepower, enhanced maneuverability, and armor protection specifically designed for hostile environment operations. With proper tactical employment, single aircraft can provide effective fire support and extraction capability. Williams was rapidly revising his assessment of Elena's military experience. The woman who'd spent 2 days demonstrating unexpected mechanical knowledge and tactical expertise was revealing qualifications that exceeded most officers in the command bunker. The knowledge you've demonstrated since arriving here, Williams said slowly, aircraft maintenance, vehicle diagnostics, tactical analysis, that's all from Special Operations Aviation experience. 160th aircraft require pilots who understand every system, Elena confirmed. Mission success depends on capabilities that conventional training doesn't provide. From the radio, Charlie Company's situation continued deteriorating as ammunition shortages and mounting casualties weakened their defensive capabilities against increasing enemy pressure. Ghost, Harrison's voice cracked through static, using Elena's operational call sign for the first time. If you're monitoring tactical frequencies, we need immediate assistance. Enemy forces are massing for final assault. Elena was already heading for the bunker exit, her movements carrying the focused urgency of someone preparing for combat operations. Sir, I need to reach Package Delta immediately. Charlie Company's window for viable extraction is closing rapidly. Kellerman made a command decision that would either save 280 Marines or create an international incident involving unauthorized special operations. Deployment. Captain Rodriguez, you have full authorization for immediate deployment using all necessary force. Elena paused at the bunker entrance, looking back at officers who'd spent 2 days dismissing her as an inexperienced supply officer. Gentlemen, Night Stalkers, don't quit. Charlie Company will be extracted. Williams watched her disappear into the Afghan night, finally understanding that he'd spent 2 days observing one of the military's most elite aviators conducting classified assessment operations under perfect cover identity. Mason slumped into a chair, the weight of his tactical failures crushing his usual arrogance. She tried to warn us. Yesterday morning, she identified every tactical problem we ignored, and we dismissed her input because she was supposedly a supply officer. Kellerman added grimly, while she was actually conducting special operations assessment of our tactical planning. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Williams was reviewing the tactical situation with new understanding of Elena's capabilities. Sir, if Captain Rodriguez has the qualifications and aircraft she claims, Charlie Company might actually have a chance. From outside the bunker, the sound of helicopter rotors was building as Package Delta approached FOB Sentinel from its classified staging area. The distinctive whine of twin turbine engines carried across the base, announcing the arrival of capabilities that would either save Charlie Company or join them in annihilation. Elena Rodriguez was about to conduct the most dangerous extraction operation of her career, flying alone into combat conditions that had already overwhelmed an entire Marine company. But she was no longer pretending to be a supply officer uncertain of her capabilities. She was Ghost, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and 280 Marines were depending on skills honed through years of missions that officially never happened. The little bird was inbound, and Captain Elena "Ghost" Rodriguez was about to remind everyone what elite military aviation looked like when failure wasn't an option. Outside, the rotor noise was growing louder, carrying with it the promise of salvation for Charlie Company and vindication for the Special Operations aviator who'd been dismissed as a logistics officer while secretly conducting the most critical assessment of her career. The mission was about to begin. ***, 280 Marines were trapped behind enemy lines. She broke every rule and brought them home. The MH-6M Little Bird materialized out of the Afghan night like a mechanical wraith, its matte black paint absorbing moonlight as twin turbine engines whispered death through the darkness. Elena Rodriguez sat in the cockpit with the calm focus of someone who'd conducted similar operations when failure meant not just mission failure, but the annihilation of American forces depending on capabilities that officially didn't exist. Her hands moved across controls with muscle memory developed through years of missions that would never appear in official records. The little bird responded to her touch with the precision of a perfectly tuned instrument. Every control input translated into exact aircraft movement through hostile airspace. "Charlie 6, this is Ghost." Elena's voice cut through radio static with professional calm that carried no hint of the odds she was facing. "I am inbound your position. Pop smoke for identification and prepare for immediate extraction." Captain Harrison's response crackled through interference created by sustained gunfire. "Ghost, negative on extraction. Enemy forces are too heavy. You'll be shot down before reaching our perimeter." Elena studied her tactical display, processing information that painted a picture of overwhelming enemy superiority. 400 insurgent fighters in prepared positions, extensive anti-aircraft capability, and terrain that favored defenders. By every conventional military assessment, the mission was impossible. "Charlie 6, understood your assessment," Elena replied calmly. "However, Night Stalkers specialize in impossible extractions. Maintain position and prepare for pickup." She pushed the little bird into a diving approach that would bring her below radar coverage while maximizing speed and maneuverability. The aircraft screamed through mountain valleys at altitudes that would kill most pilots. Elena's hands making constant micro-adjustments to keep the helicopter centered in terrain that left no margin for error. Her professional assessment was clear. Conventional extraction procedures couldn't address Charlie Company's situation. Success required tactics that pushed both aircraft and pilot beyond normal operational limits, employing capabilities that existed specifically for situations where standard assets would fail. The first indication of enemy contact came as tracer rounds reached up from ridgeline positions, green streaks of light that seemed to move slowly until they flashed past at supersonic velocity. Elena's response was instantaneous, diving lower, using terrain features to mask her approach while analyzing enemy positions for tactical weaknesses. "Charlie 6. I have visual on enemy positions," Elena reported, her voice steady despite automatic weapons fire that was converging on her aircraft. "Multiple prepared fighting positions with interlocking fields of fire. Estimate 400 fighters as reported." The tactical situation was exactly what her professional assessment had predicted during yesterday's briefing. A perfectly executed ambush that had drawn Charlie Company into terrain where enemy advantages were maximized and American technological superiority was negated. Elena armed her weapons systems with practiced efficiency. Twin M134 miniguns capable of firing 4,000 rounds per minute, combined with rocket pods loaded with high explosive ordnance designed for precision strikes against prepared positions. The little bird carried enough firepower to suppress enemy resistance, but only if employed with surgical precision that left no margin for error. "Ghost, you need to abort." Harrison's voice carried desperation as enemy fire intensified around Charlie Company's shrinking perimeter. "They've got you bracketed. You're flying into a kill zone." Elena's response came through the distinctive sound of minigun fire as she engaged enemy positions that were threatening her approach route. The aircraft shuddered under recoil as 6-barrel Gatling guns unleashed suppressive fire that turned insurgent fighting positions into clouds of dust and debris. Negative abort, Charlie 6. Elena's voice carried no trace of doubt despite tracer rounds that were converging on her aircraft from multiple directions. Night Stalkers, don't quit. Prepare for extraction sequence. The little bird dropped into the valley like a falling star, its black silhouette barely visible against mountain ridges. Elena had calculated the approach with mathematical precision, using terrain features to mask her descent while maintaining sufficient airspeed to avoid giving enemy fighters easy targeting solutions. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from positions that intelligence assessments had failed to identify. RPG trails crisscrossed the darkness as insurgent forces focused overwhelming firepower on the lone helicopter that threatened to disrupt their tactical superiority. Elena's response demonstrated why 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment pilots were considered the elite of military aviation. She flew the little bird through defensive fire with maneuvers that seemed to defy physics, rolling inverted to avoid missile locks, diving below minimum safe altitude to use ground clutter for protection, then pulling vertical climbs that pressed her body against the seat with crushing G-forces. Contact left. Contact left. Charlie Company's radio chatter painted an audio picture of Marines fighting desperately against increasing enemy pressure. They're advancing on the southern Jenner. Preemed. We can't hold much longer. Elena could see Charlie Company's position now, a tight defensive perimeter in terrain that offered minimal cover, surrounded by enemy forces that were closing for final assault. Muzzle flashes from Marine positions showed disciplined fire control, but ammunition shortages were evident in the decreasing rate of defensive fire. She targeted enemy positions that posed the greatest threat to Charlie Company's survival, her weapons systems, painting laser designators on insurgent fighting positions, before unleashing precision strikes that eliminated tactical advantages the enemy had spent weeks preparing. The first rocket strike hit an insurgent machine gun position that had been suppressing Marine movement, the explosion illuminating the valley floor in brilliant orange light. Secondary detonations suggested ammunition storage that would no longer threaten American forces. Elena's second attack run targeted anti-aircraft positions that threatened her ability to conduct extraction operations. Minigun fire swept across ridgeline positions with surgical precision, each burst calculated to suppress enemy capability without creating collateral damage that could endanger Charlie Company. "Ghost, you're taking hits," Harrison reported, his voice tight with concern as he watched tracer rounds impact Elena's aircraft. "Your starboard engine is smoking." Elena's professional assessment confirmed engine damage, but systems analysis indicated continued operational capability despite reduced performance margins. The little bird was built to survive combat damage that would down conventional aircraft, and her training included procedures for flying with significant battle damage. "Charlie 6, minor damage only," Elena replied with characteristic understatement. Continuing extraction operations. Her third attack run eliminated the final enemy positions that could engage Charlie Company during extraction procedures. The valley floor erupted in coordinated explosions as Elena's weapons eliminated tactical advantages that had made the ambush site nearly perfect for insurgent operations. But destroying enemy positions was only the first phase of extraction operations that would require precision flying under conditions that pushed both aircraft and pilot beyond normal operational limits. Elena brought the little bird into Charlie Company's defensive perimeter with an approach that seemed impossible, auto-rotating through enemy fire while maintaining sufficient control authority to execute a combat landing in terrain that offered barely enough space for the helicopter's rotor disc. The aircraft touched down hard, skids scraping against rocky ground as Elena fought crosswinds and combat damage that made every control input a struggle. Around the helicopter, Marines emerged from fighting positions with the stunned expressions of soldiers who'd been resigned to death until salvation arrived in the form of a single pilot willing to fly into impossible odds. "Load wounded first," Elena's voice carried command authority that cut through the chaos of combat extraction. Maximum load, minimum time. We're leaving no one behind. Marines moved with desperate efficiency, carrying wounded comrades while maintaining defensive fire against enemy positions that were reorganizing after Elena's suppressive attacks. The Little Bird's cabin filled with Marines who'd been fighting for survival against overwhelming odds until a single helicopter pilot had changed the tactical equation. Elena's aircraft was severely overloaded according to normal operational parameters, but 160th pilots trained specifically for missions that exceeded standard limitations. She pulled collective power that pushed the turbine engines beyond red line limits, trading mechanical safety margins for the capability to lift Charlie Company out of the kill zone. The Little Bird struggled into the air, barely maintaining flight with combat damage and extreme overload that made every foot of altitude a victory against physics and enemy fire. Elena flew the crippled aircraft with skills that transformed mechanical impossibility into operational success. "Ghost, you're not going to clear the ridgeline," Harrison warned, watching Elena's aircraft fight for altitude while enemy fire continued from positions that hadn't been eliminated during her suppressive attacks. Elena's response came through gritted teeth as she pushed damaged systems beyond their design limits. Charlie 6. Night Stalkers specialize in impossible flights. Maintain covering fire until we're clear. The helicopter climbed through sustained automatic weapons fire, each foot of altitude bought with precise control inputs that compensated for battle damage and overload conditions. Elena's professional capabilities were the only factor preventing catastrophic failure as she nursed the Little Bird toward minimum safe altitude. Enemy fire intensified as insurgent forces realized their tactical advantage was disappearing with each foot of Elena's climbing flight. RPG trails reached toward the struggling helicopter, while machine gun fire created a deadly web that Elena had to navigate with an aircraft that was barely controllable. She cleared the ridgeline with less than 10 feet of altitude to spare, the Little Bird's damaged engines screaming in protest, as Elena pushed power beyond sustainable limits. Behind them, the ambush site fell away into darkness, its tactical advantages neutralized by a single pilot who'd been willing to accept odds that no rational assessment would consider survivable. But Charlie Company wasn't fully extracted yet. The Little Bird could carry only a fraction of the trapped Marines, and Elena would have to return multiple times to complete an evacuation that was becoming more dangerous with each trip as enemy forces adapted to her tactics. Charlie 6. That's 24 Marines. Extracted. Elena reported as she flew toward Forward Sentinel with the first load of rescued personnel, returning for second extraction in 15 minutes. Harrison's voice carried disbelief and growing hope. "Ghost, you can't keep doing this. They'll be ready for you next time." Elena's response demonstrated the mindset that defined special operations aviation. Charlie 6, we extract everyone or no one. Night Stalkers don't quit. As the Little Bird limped through the Afghan night with its cargo of Marines who'd been pulled from certain death, Elena Rodriguez was already calculating approach routes for her second extraction run. The mission was far from over, and 256 Marines were still waiting for salvation that could only come from a pilot willing to break every rule to bring them home. The most dangerous phase of the operation was just beginning. The second extraction run nearly killed Elena before she reached Charlie Company's position. Enemy forces had repositioned anti-aircraft assets to cover her most likely approach routes, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned the valley into a shooting gallery designed specifically to destroy a single helicopter, making repeated extraction attempts. Elena flew the damaged Little Bird through defensive patterns that tested the absolute limits of both aircraft and pilot capabilities. The starboard engine was running rough, hydraulic pressure was declining, and multiple warning lights painted the cockpit in red urgency. Every control input required physical strength to overcome battle damage that conventional aircraft would never survive. Charlie 6, this is Ghost on final approach. Elena's voice carried strain that reflected the enormous effort required to fly a crippled aircraft through sustained enemy fire. Pop smoke for landing zone marking. The tactical situation had deteriorated during her absence. Enemy forces had advanced closer to Charlie Company's defensive perimeter, and ammunition shortages were forcing Marines to conserve fire for point-blank engagements. The window for viable extraction was closing rapidly. Elena's approach was a masterpiece of combat flying that demonstrated why 160th pilots were considered irreplaceable assets. She dove the little bird through anti-aircraft fire with maneuvers that seemed to violate the laws of physics, using terrain features and enemy expectations to create moments of tactical surprise that allowed survival in an impossible environment. The helicopter touched down inside Charlie Company's shrinking perimeter as enemy fire intensified around the landing zone. Marines scrambled toward extraction while maintaining defensive positions against insurgent forces that were pressing forward for final assault. 32 Marines loaded, Elena reported as the little bird struggled back into the air with another group of rescued personnel, returning for third extraction. But the third run revealed that enemy forces had learned from her previous approaches. Anti-aircraft fire was coordinated and concentrated, creating kill zones that left no safe approach routes to Charlie Company's position. Elena flew through defensive fire that should have destroyed her aircraft multiple times, her survival depending on split-second decisions that pushed both helicopter and pilot beyond rational operational limits. The little bird absorbed hits that would have downed conventional aircraft, its specialized armor and redundant systems allowing continued operation despite accumulating battle damage. By the fourth extraction run, Elena's aircraft was held together by determination and engineering margins that were never intended for sustained combat operations. Warning lights illuminated every critical system. Fuel was running critically low, and the starboard engine was producing barely 50% power. But 164 Marines remained trapped in the kill zone, and Elena Rodriguez had sworn that no one would be left behind. "Ghost, your bird is dying." Harrison's voice carried desperate concern as he watched Elena's helicopter struggle to maintain flight after each extraction. "You can't keep this up." Elena's response came through the sound of minigun fire as she suppressed enemy positions that threatened her landing approach. Charlie 6, aircraft status is manageable. Continuing extraction operations. It was a lie, and everyone monitoring tactical frequencies knew it. The little bird was sustained by pilot skill and mechanical impossibility in equal measure, each extraction bringing them closer to catastrophic failure that would doom everyone aboard. The fifth extraction run pushed Elena past the edge of rational decision-making into the realm of pure desperation. Her aircraft was barely flyable, fuel state was critical, and enemy fire had intensified to levels that made survival a matter of seconds rather than tactical planning. She brought the little bird into Charlie Company's perimeter for what would be either the penultimate extraction or the final crash that would add her name to the casualty list. Marines loaded with desperate efficiency while Elena fought to keep damaged systems operational through sheer force of will. 41 Marines loaded, she reported as the helicopter clawed its way back into the air. Fuel state critical. This is the final extraction run. Harrison's voice cracked with emotion as he processed the implications. "Ghost, that leaves 85 Marines still on the ground. You can't fit 85 Marines in that bird." Elena's professional assessment confirmed what everyone already knew. The little bird's maximum capacity was roughly 30 passengers under extreme overload conditions. Extracting the remaining Marines would require accepting aircraft loading that exceeded every safety parameter the military had established. "Charlie 6, we extract everyone or no one," Elena repeated, her voice carrying finality that left no room for argument. "Prepare final extraction." What followed was the most dangerous helicopter operation in special operations history. Elena brought the crippled little bird back to Charlie Company's position and began loading Marines in numbers that should have made flight impossible. The aircraft's cabin filled far beyond capacity, as desperate Marines climbed aboard an aircraft that was already damaged beyond normal operational limits. Elena pushed engine power into ranges that guaranteed mechanical failure, trading future capability for present survival as she attempted to lift a load that defied every principle of rotary wing flight. The little bird struggled off the ground with mechanical protests that could be heard over enemy gunfire. Every foot of altitude cost enormous effort, as Elena flew an aircraft that was essentially a controlled crash waiting to happen. But somehow, impossibly, the helicopter continued climbing. Elena's skill combined with mechanical margins that engineers had built into aircraft designed for missions that officially didn't exist, allowing survival in conditions that should have resulted in immediate catastrophic failure. The flight back to FOB Sentinel became a race between Elena's declining aircraft capability and the medical needs of wounded Marines who'd been extracted from certain death. The little bird limped through the Afghan night, held aloft by determination and mechanical impossibility in equal measure. When Elena finally brought the overloaded helicopter onto FOB Sentinel's landing pad, the aircraft settled with mechanical groans that suggested structural damage beyond repair. But every Marine from Charlie Company was aboard, alive, rescued from an ambush that should have annihilated the entire unit. Elena shut down the engines and sat motionless in the cockpit for a long moment. The weight of accomplishment and exhaustion combining into emotional numbness that followed extreme stress. Around her aircraft, medical personnel swarmed to assist wounded Marines, while base personnel stared in disbelief at the impossible extraction that had just been completed. Lieutenant Williams was the first to reach Elena's position, his face showing amazement and growing respect for the pilot who'd conducted single-handed combat operations against overwhelming odds. "Captain Rodriguez," Williams said quietly, "you just extracted 280 Marines from an impossible tactical situation using an aircraft that shouldn't have been able to fly after the first extraction." Elena looked at the crowd gathering around her aircraft. Marines who'd been pulled from certain death, base personnel who'd witnessed impossible aviation, and command staff who were processing the implications of what they'd just observed. "Lieutenant," Elena replied with characteristic understatement, "that's what Night Stalkers do." As she climbed down from the cockpit, Elena Rodriguez became aware that the entire base population was gathering around the landing pad. Marines, sailors, soldiers, and airmen were emerging from buildings and duty positions to witness the aftermath of the most dramatic extraction operation in recent military memory. The crowd parted as Major Kellerman approached, his face showing the complex emotions of a commander who'd witnessed subordinate officers accomplish the impossible under conditions that should have resulted in complete failure. "Captain Rodriguez," Kellerman said formally, "you have just conducted the most extraordinary aviation operation I've witnessed in 25 years of military service." Elena remained at attention, aware that her unauthorized deployment of classified assets had violated numerous regulations despite saving 280 lives that would otherwise have been lost. "Sir," Elena replied professionally, "mission parameters required immediate action using available assets." But Kellerman was looking past regulations toward results that spoke for themselves. Charlie Company stood alive around Elena's aircraft, rescued from certain annihilation by a pilot who'd been willing to accept odds that no rational assessment would consider survivable. From the crowd, Lieutenant Colonel Mason approached with an expression that reflected the complete collapse of the arrogance and overconfidence that had characterized his military leadership. His face showed shame, recognition, and dawning understanding of the scope of his tactical failures. Mason stopped 3 feet from Elena and slowly, deliberately, raised his hand in a salute that carried weight far beyond military protocol. It was acknowledgement of professional superiority, recognition of capabilities that exceeded his own, and apology for dismissals that had nearly cost 280 Marine lives. "Captain Rodriguez," Mason said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I dismissed tactical input from someone whose qualifications exceeded my own. My overconfidence nearly resulted in the annihilation of an entire friend company." Elena returned the salute with professional courtesy that carried no trace of vindication or personal satisfaction. "Sir, tactical decisions are command responsibility. Results speak for operational effectiveness." But the crowd around them was processing implications that extended far beyond personal military relationships. Elena Rodriguez had demonstrated capabilities that redefined their understanding of what elite military aviation could accomplish when conventional assets failed. One by one, Marines from Charlie Company began approaching Elena's position. These were warriors who'd been facing certain death until a single pilot had changed the tactical equation through skills that existed specifically for impossible situations. Sergeant First Class Martinez was the first to render formal honors. His salute sharp and deliberate despite exhaustion and minor wounds sustained during the ambush. "Ma'am," Martinez said simply, "you brought us home." Behind Martinez, other Charlie Company Marines followed his example, creating a formation that rendered honors to the pilot who'd risked everything to ensure no one was left behind. Elena accepted their salutes with the composed professionalism that defined special operations personnel, but Williams could see deeper emotion in her expression. Satisfaction that came from mission accomplishment under impossible conditions. The crowd continued growing as word spread throughout FOB Sentinel about the extraordinary extraction operation. Personnel emerged from duty positions and off-duty areas to witness recognition being rendered to someone who demonstrated capabilities that existed in whispered legends rather than official military records. Captain Harrison approached with wounds bandaged and uniform torn from hours of combat, but his bearing remained that of a Marine officer who'd led his men through desperate circumstances until salvation arrived. "Captain Rodriguez," Harrison said formally, "Charlie Company owes our lives to your willingness to conduct operations that exceeded every reasonable assessment of survivable risk." Elena nodded acknowledgement, her response carrying the understated professionalism that characterized special operations personnel. "Captain Harrison, your Marines conducted themselves with honor under extreme conditions. Extraction was simply providing transportation home." But Harrison understood that Elena's transportation had required flying skills that pushed both aircraft and pilot beyond normal operational limits through sustained combat conditions that should have resulted in mission failure. The salutes continued as more personnel approached Elena's position. Marines, sailors, soldiers, and airmen rendered honors to someone who demonstrated what elite military capabilities looked like when applied to impossible situations. Williams watched Elena's reaction to recognition that was entirely different from the dismissals and skepticism she'd encountered while maintaining cover identity as a supply officer. Her true capabilities were finally being acknowledged by personnel who understood what they'd witnessed. "Captain Rodriguez," Williams said quietly, "yesterday, you were dismissed as an inexperienced supply officer. Tonight, you're being recognized as one of the most accomplished pilots in military history." Elena looked around the crowd of military personnel who were rendering honors that reflected genuine respect rather than protocol requirements. "Lieutenant," Elena replied with a slight smile, "recognition follows results. Charlie Company is home, and that's what matters." The crowd was continuing to grow as off-duty personnel heard about the extraordinary extraction operation. Elena Rodriguez had become the center of attention at FOB Sentinel, her cover identity finally abandoned in favor of capabilities that had saved 280 lives through aviation skills that existed specifically for impossible missions. But the most significant moment was yet to come, as base personnel processed the full implications of what they'd witnessed, and recognition spread beyond immediate observers to encompass understanding of what elite military aviation could accomplish when failure was not acceptable. The salute that would define Elena's legacy was building momentum as word spread throughout the base about the pilot who'd been dismissed as weak but had proven to be exactly the hero the moment demanded. The transformation of FOB Sentinel began within hours of Elena's impossible extraction, but the lasting changes would reshape military culture far beyond a single forward base in Afghanistan. Word of the operation spread through official and unofficial military networks with the velocity of legend, carrying implications that extended far beyond one pilot's extraordinary capabilities. Major Kellerman's after-action report required classifications that protected operational details while acknowledging results that redefined possibilities for personnel recovery operations under extreme conditions. The extraction of Charlie Company would become a case study in special operations aviation, though most details would remain classified for decades. Elena found herself in the unique position of having conducted a mission that officially couldn't be acknowledged, but had been witnessed by hundreds of military personnel who understood exactly what they'd observed. Her cover identity as a supply officer was permanently abandoned, replaced by recognition as one of the most accomplished pilots in special operations history. Lieutenant Williams requested transfer to Special Operations, Aviation Training, his assessment of Elena's capabilities having convinced him that conventional military aviation was inadequate preparation for the challenges facing forward deployed forces. His application cited exposure to operational capabilities that redefined understanding of military aviation possibilities. Captain Harrison submitted recommendations for Elena's recognition that pushed against classification restrictions while documenting leadership under extreme conditions. Captain Rodriguez demonstrated capabilities that exist specifically for situations where conventional assets cannot accomplish the mission. Harrison wrote, "Her willingness to accept impossible odds saved 280 Marines who would otherwise have been lost." But the most significant transformation involved Lieutenant Colonel Mason, whose tactical failures had created the crisis Elena was forced to resolve through extraordinary aviation skills. Mason's overconfidence and dismissal of critical input had nearly resulted in the complete annihilation of Charlie Company. 3 days after the extraction, Mason requested a private meeting with Elena in the FOB Sentinel Command Center. His demeanor had changed completely from the arrogant officer who'd publicly dismissed her tactical assessment during operational planning. "Captain Rodriguez," Mason began, his voice carrying humility that reflected genuine recognition of professional superiority, "I need to apologize for tactical decisions that nearly cost 280 Marine lives." Elena's response carried the professional courtesy that defined special operations personnel. "Sir, tactical planning involves complex factors and time constraints that create challenging decision-making environments." But Mason understood that Elena's diplomatic response masked the reality that his overconfidence had created a preventable disaster. "Captain, you provided tactical assessment based on special operations experience, and I dismissed your input because it didn't match my preconceptions about supply officer capabilities." Elena studied Mason's expression, recognizing genuine remorse rather than political positioning. "Sir, assessment operations require cover identities that sometimes create communication challenges." Mason nodded slowly, processing implications that extended beyond their specific interaction. "Captain, how many other forward bases have special operations personnel conducting assessment operations under cover identities?" Elena's response was careful, acknowledging Mason's question without revealing classified information. "Special operations requirements sometimes necessitate personnel placement that isn't reflected in official assignment records." The conversation continued for an hour, with Mason seeking to understand how his tactical planning had failed assessment criteria established by Special Operations Command. Elena provided insights that helped Mason recognize the scope of improvements needed in intelligence analysis and operational decision-making. By the end of their discussion, Mason had submitted his own request for transfer to training assignments where his experience could contribute to preventing similar tactical failures. His recommendation emphasized the need for commanders to recognize and incorporate input from personnel with specialized expertise, regardless of official assignment classifications. Elena's presence at FOB Sentinel was officially acknowledged through a change in assignment orders that listed her actual qualifications and mission parameters. No longer pretending to be a supply officer, she became the base's special operations liaison, providing tactical expertise for future operations. The position was created specifically to ensure that special operations assessment capabilities were integrated into conventional planning processes, preventing the kind of intelligence gaps that had nearly destroyed Charlie Company. Lieutenant Williams became Elena's deputy, his enthusiasm for special operations aviation translating into dedication to learning capabilities that existed outside conventional military training. Their partnership represented a new model for integrating special operations expertise with forward base operations. "Captain Rodriguez," Williams said, during one of their tactical planning sessions, "your assessment capabilities could have prevented disasters at other forward bases where special operations personnel weren't available." Elena nodded, understanding that her mission at FOB Sentinel was part of a broader effort to improve tactical planning across multiple theaters. "Lieutenant, Special Operations Assessment is designed to identify and address capability gaps before they result in operational failures." The little bird that Elena had flown during Charlie Company's extraction was retired from SO-letter service. Its airframe stressed beyond repair by combat damage and operational loads that exceeded design specifications. But the aircraft was preserved as a monument to capabilities that existed specifically for impossible missions. Sergeant Jenkins, the motor pool chief who'd witnessed Elena's mechanical expertise, submitted recommendations for improving vehicle maintenance training based on diagnostic techniques she'd demonstrated. Captain Rodriguez displayed troubleshooting capabilities that could save weeks of maintenance time if properly integrated into standard procedures, Jenkins wrote. The base's medical personnel documented treatment procedures Elena had employed during the extraction, noting advanced trauma care capabilities that exceeded standard pilot training. Her medical skills, like her aviation and mechanical expertise, reflected special operations training that prepared personnel for missions requiring diverse capabilities. Elena's tactical assessments were integrated into FOB Sentinel's operational planning, her professional insights preventing several potential disasters through early identification of intelligence gaps and tactical vulnerabilities. Commands began requesting her input on operations that involved terrain or enemy capabilities outside conventional assessment parameters. 6 months after the Charlie Company extraction, Elena received orders for rotation back to 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment Headquarters. Her assessment mission at FOB Sentinel was complete, having identified tactical deficiencies and demonstrated integration solutions that would be applied across multiple forward bases. The farewell ceremony involved the entire base population, military personnel from every service branch gathering to recognize someone who demonstrated what elite military capabilities looked like when applied to impossible situations. Elena's extraction of Charlie Company had become legendary throughout military circles, though operational details remained classified. Captain Harrison, now fully recovered from wounds sustained during the ambush, spoke for Charlie Company during the ceremony. Captain Rodriguez demonstrated capabilities that exist specifically for situations where conventional assets cannot accomplish the mission. She brought 280 Marines home from certain death through aviation skills that redefined our understanding of what's possible. Major Kellerman's remarks emphasized the broader implications of Elena's service at FOB Sentinel. Captain Rodriguez conducted assessment operations that identified critical tactical deficiencies while demonstrating integration solutions that will improve operational effectiveness across multiple theaters. Her contributions extend far beyond the extraordinary extraction operation that saved Charlie Company. Elena's response carried the understated professionalism that characterized special operations personnel. "Gentlemen, special operations capabilities exist to support conventional forces when standard assets cannot accomplish the mission. Charlie Company's extraction was simply an application of training and equipment designed for impossible situations." But the crowd understood that Elena's simple application had required skills that pushed both aircraft and pilot beyond normal operational limits through sustained combat conditions that should have resulted in mission failure. The ceremony concluded with a formation salute that involved the entire base population. Marines, sailors, soldiers, and airmen, rendering honors to someone who demonstrated what elite military aviation could accomplish when failure was not acceptable. Elena accepted their recognition with composed professionalism, but Williams could see deeper satisfaction in her expression: completion of a mission that had saved lives while improving tactical capabilities for future operations. As Elena's helicopter departed FOB Sentinel for the final time, base personnel watched until the aircraft disappeared into the Afghan sky. Her legacy would continue through improved tactical planning, integrated assessment procedures, and recognition that elite capabilities sometimes operated under cover identities that required careful identification and proper utilization. Lieutenant Williams remained at FOB Sentinel as Special Operations Liaison, his position created to ensure that Elena's assessment insights were implemented and maintained. His assignment represented a new model for integrating special operations expertise with conventional military operations. The Little Bird Monument became a gathering point for base personnel, its preserved airframe serving as reminder of what was possible when elite capabilities were properly employed. Plaques documented the aircraft's service history and the extraction operation that had saved 280 Marine lives through aviation skills that existed specifically for impossible missions. Elena's impact on FOB Sentinel extended beyond immediate operational improvements to fundamental changes in military culture. Personnel learned to recognize and value expertise regardless of official assignment classifications, preventing the kind of dismissals that had nearly resulted in Charlie Company's annihilation. The base's tactical planning incorporated lessons from Elena's assessment, her professional insights becoming standard procedures for operations involving terrain or enemy capabilities that exceeded conventional parameters. Future missions benefited from analytical frameworks that Elena had demonstrated during her cover assignment. Years later, military historians would document the Charlie Company extraction as a defining moment in special operations aviation, though classification restrictions would limit public understanding of the tactical details. Elena's capabilities would remain largely unknown outside military circles, her service protected by operational security requirements that govern special operations missions. But within military communities, Elena Rodriguez would be remembered as the pilot who demonstrated what elite aviation looked like when 280 Marines needed someone willing to break every rule to bring them home. Her legacy lived in improved tactical planning, integrated assessment procedures, and recognition that true strength sometimes operated in disguise until circumstances demanded revelation. The story of FOB Sentinel's transformation became a case study in recognizing and utilizing elite capabilities that existed outside normal military channels. Elena's service proved that special operations personnel could enhance conventional military effectiveness through proper integration and recognition. Lieutenant Colonel Mason, reassigned to training duties, would spend the remainder of his career ensuring that other commanders understood the importance of incorporating specialized input into tactical planning. His experience with Elena's assessment became a cautionary tale about the costs of dismissing expertise based on appearance or official assignment. The Afghan mountains remained dangerous, but FOB Sentinel operated with enhanced tactical awareness that reflected Elena's assessment insights. Personnel approaching unknown situations carried understanding that elite capabilities might exist within their ranks, disguised as conventional assignments but ready to provide extraordinary results when properly recognized and employed. Elena Rodriguez had accomplished her assessment mission completely, leaving behind improvements that would save lives and enhance operational effectiveness for years to come. Her service represented the finest traditions of special operations personnel, quiet professionalism that achieved extraordinary results while remaining largely invisible to public recognition. The mission was complete, but the legacy would endure through every life saved by improved tactical planning and every operation enhanced by recognition that elite capabilities existed specifically for situations where conventional assets could not accomplish the fit mission. In the end, Elena Rodriguez had proven that true strength didn't announce itself with bravado or seek validation through recognition. It simply existed, waiting quietly for the moment when circumstances demanded capabilities that could transform impossible situations into successful missions. The Night Stalkers had reminded everyone what elite military aviation looked like when failure was not an option, and FOB Sentinel would never forget the pilot who demonstrated those capabilities while 280 Marines depended on someone willing to break every rule to bring them home. 5 years after the Charlie Company extraction, Elena Rodriguez sat in the briefing room at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, preparing another class of special operations aviation candidates for missions that would officially never happen. Her students came from every service branch, pilots who demonstrated exceptional capabilities and sought training that would prepare them for impossible situations. Special operations aviation exists for one purpose, Elena told her students, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd conducted missions that pushed both aircraft and pilot beyond normal operational limits. When conventional assets cannot accomplish the processed mission, we provide capabilities that make the impossible routine. Her lecture included tactical principles developed during assessment operations at forward bases across multiple theaters. Elena's insights had been incorporated into special operations doctrine, though her specific contributions remained classified beyond official recognition. The most important lesson, Elena continued, is that elite capabilities often operate in disguise. Your mission might require cover identities that conceal your true training until circumstances demand revelation. Be prepared to serve where needed, regardless of recognition or official acknowledgement. Among her students sat Lieutenant Williams, now a qualified special operations pilot conducting his own assessment missions. His training under Elena's guidance had prepared him for operations that required capabilities existing outside conventional military channels. After class, Williams approached Elena's desk with the respectful demeanor that characterized their continued professional relationship. "Ma'am, do you ever regret the classification restrictions that prevent public recognition of your service?" Elena looked out the window toward the flight line where new little birds sat prepared for missions that would never appear in official records. "Lieutenant, our service isn't measured by public recognition. It's measured by lives saved and missions accomplished when conventional capabilities cannot succeed." Williams nodded, understanding that Elena's satisfaction came from operational results rather than personal recognition. Her legacy existed in improved tactical planning, enhanced pilot training, and thousands of military personnel who served more effectively because of capabilities she developed and demonstrated. "The Charlie Company extraction," Williams said quietly. "That operation changed everything about how special operations aviation approaches personnel recovery." Elena smiled slightly, remembering 280 Marines who'd been pulled from certain death through aviation skills that existed specifically for impossible missions. "Lieutenant, that operation demonstrated what happens when elite capabilities are properly recognized and employed. The mission succeeded because circumstances finally allowed revelation of training and equipment designed for exactly those conditions." Her words carried broader implications about military culture and the importance of discretion, recognizing expertise, regardless of official assignment or appearance. Elena's service had proven that elite capabilities might exist anywhere within military organizations, waiting for proper identification and utilization. The conversation was interrupted by an encrypted communication device that announced new assessment mission requirements. Elena reviewed operational parameters that would position special operations personnel at forward locations where their capabilities might be needed but not officially acknowledged. "Another assessment mission?" Williams asked, recognizing the classification markings that indicated sensitive operations. Elena secured the communication device with practiced efficiency. "Lieutenant, assessment operations continue across multiple theaters. Elite capabilities require constant evaluation and integration to ensure operational effectiveness." Williams understood that Elena would soon deploy under another cover identity, her true capabilities concealed until circumstances demanded their revelation. Her service represented the finest traditions of special operations personnel. Quiet professionalism, that achieved extraordinary results while remaining largely invisible to official recognition. As Elena prepared for departure, she looked once more toward the flight line, where aircraft sat ready for missions that would test the absolute limits of both equipment and personnel. Her legacy would continue through every pilot trained to conduct impossible operations, and every life saved by capabilities that existed specifically for situations where conventional assets could not succeed. The story of Elena Rodriguez would remain largely classified, her service protected by operational security requirements that govern special operations missions. But within military communities, her name would be whispered with reverence reserved for legends who demonstrated what elite aviation looked like when failure was not acceptable. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.